The summer air hung thick and heavy over Miami, the kind of muggy heat that made breathing feel like drowning. Storm clouds built dark purple on the horizon, pressing down on the city like a lid on a coffin. At 6:44 in the morning, on a Tuesday that would change everything, Rowan Reynolds stood in the doorway of her third-floor walk-up apartment and watched 50 men in identical black suits form a corridor from the street to her door. They moved like a single organism, disciplined and silent. Black SUVs lined the block below, their engines ticking as they cooled. The neighbors were staring from behind curtains. Mrs. Chen from 3B had dropped her morning coffee mug on the balcony. And in the center of those 50 men stood Vincent Ferraro. He was 6'3", built like someone who had survived more than one attempt on his life. Salt and pepper hair, thick and swept back. A scar cut through his left eyebrow like a blade, pale against his tanned skin. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored so precisely that every seam looked like it had been drawn with a ruler. The fabric alone probably cost more than Rowan's annual rent. In one massive hand, he held the small hand of a 6-year-old girl wearing purple unicorn pajamas. Emma. The same Emma that Rowan had been volunteering with at the Riverside Children's Shelter for the past 3 weeks. The same Emma who drew pictures in crayon and called her Mama Rowan during snack time. The same Emma whose dark eyes and careful smile suggested a child who had learned very early that the world was not safe. Emma broke free from Vincent's grip and ran straight at Rowan, her bare feet slapping against the concrete walkway. "Mama Rowan! Mama Rowan!" The child's voice cracked with joy and relief. She wrapped her small arms around Rowan's legs, holding on like she might disappear if she let go. Rowan's hands moved on instinct, running over the child's hair, her back, checking for injuries out of pure habit. "Emma, sweetheart, what are you doing here? How did you?" Vincent's voice cut through the humid air like a blade wrapped in ice. Rowan Reynolds. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact delivered in a tone that suggested he was accustomed to being listened to. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, the kind of voice that had given orders to men who did not question them. His dark eyes, storm gray in the morning light, fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to step backward into her apartment and lock the door. But she could not move. Emma was clinging to her. And there were 50 men in black suits watching her every breath. Vincent stepped forward, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the concrete. His 2 lieutenants flanked him. The first was Rocco, broad-shouldered and scarred at the temple, with the blank expression of someone who had learned to hide his thoughts. The second was Enzo, younger, maybe 35, with his hand resting inside his jacket where a weapon would sit. His fingers flexed slightly as he watched Rowan. Ready. Waiting. In 15 years, Rocco whispered to Enzo, so quietly that Rowan almost did not hear it, "I have never seen him come for someone like this." "She is just a maid," Enzo whispered back, but there was doubt in his voice. Vincent's gaze never left Rowan's face. "You found me bleeding in an alley behind Marcello's restaurant last night at 11:43 in the evening. I was unconscious. You could have walked past. 99 people out of 100 would have kept walking. Instead, you stopped. You used kitchen towels and a first aid kit you stole from the restaurant to slow the bleeding. You sat with me for 42 minutes in the dark, talking to me, telling me I was not allowed to die because the world needed men who could change. You called me an ambulance from the pay phone on the corner and disappeared." Rowan's stomach clenched. She remembered. She remembered the smell of blood and garbage, the weight of the man's head against her thighs as she applied pressure to the wound on his side. She remembered the sirens. She remembered running because a poor maid at 3 in the morning near a bleeding man in an alley was the kind of thing that could destroy her life. She did not remember his face. She had been too focused on keeping him breathing. "I do not know who you are," Rowan said, and her voice trembled like a candle in the wind. "And I do not know how you found me." Vincent's expression shifted. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest, visible for just a moment in the tightening of his jaw. "Security cameras on 3 buildings. You work as a maid for a cleaning service. Your name is in their system. You have worked nights at 5 different locations across Miami for the past 2 years. You live here. You have $34 in your pocket right now, because I know what your bank account looks like. And you have a debt collector's letter on your kitchen counter stamped final notice, dated 3 days ago, for $200,000 owed within 10 days for your niece's heart valve replacement surgery. Rowan felt the blood drain from her face. No one was supposed to know about that letter. No one was supposed to know about Emma, her niece, not this Emma, but her sister's daughter, lying in a hospital bed with a failing heart that her parents could not afford to fix. Rowan had been working triple shifts for 18 months, saving every dollar, and she was still $47,000 short. The $34 in her pocket was supposed to last until Friday. How are you? Rowan started. Because I have people who know things, Vincent said. His voice was still calm, still controlled, but there was something else underneath it now. Something that suggested the calm was a choice, not a natural state. And because one of those people told me that a young woman matching your description was spotted on security footage saving a man's life in an alley when she had every reason to walk past. He paused. And because my daughter has been asking for you every single day for the past 3 weeks. Emma's grip on Rowan's leg tightened. The child pressed her face against Rowan's thigh, hiding. I do not understand, Rowan whispered. Emma spent the first 6 months of her life thinking I was dead, Vincent said, and something shifted in his voice. A crack formed in the careful control. She spent 6 months in the hands of people who were using her as leverage against me. I found her 3 weeks ago. I brought her to the place you volunteer. I watched you with her. The way you talked to her. The way you made her feel safe. The way you let her call you Mama when everyone else has been teaching her to be afraid. He stepped closer. She has been calling my physicians Mama. She has been calling my housekeepers Mama. She has been calling every woman she sees Mama because she is looking for the one person in this world who made her feel like she was not a tool or a weapon or leverage. And 3 days ago, she finally found someone and said, that one. That one is real. And that someone was you. Rowan looked down at Emma. The child's eyes were wet with tears. Does she know? Rowan asked quietly. Does she know you are her father? No, Vincent said. I was not sure how to tell her. I am not very good at this. His men shifted uncomfortably. In 15 years, none of them had ever heard Vincent Ferraro admit that he was not very good at anything. The storm clouds overhead darkened. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, splashing against the concrete. I need to know why you saved my life, Vincent said. I need to know what made you stop in that alley. Because in my experience, people do not risk themselves for strangers without a reason. And I need to know if that reason is something that could come back and destroy you. Behind Vincent, the men in black suits stood motionless. The rain was starting to come harder now, drumming against the black SUVs. But no one moved. No one spoke. They were all waiting for Rowan to answer. She looked at Vincent Ferraro, this man whose name she did not know but whose daughter was holding her like she was the only thing keeping her anchored to the world. I saved your life, Rowan said slowly, because you were a human being who was dying, and I could not let that happen if I could stop it. I did not know who you were. I still do not know who you are. And I do not care. I did it because it was the right thing to do. That is the only reason. Vincent was quiet for a very long moment. What changed everything was that in saving a man she did not know, Rowan Reynolds had just opened a door that no one could close again. In saving Vincent Ferraro's life, she had introduced herself to the most powerful man in Miami. And in comforting his daughter, she had become the one thing that man could not afford to lose. The rain fell harder. My name is Vincent, he said finally. And I think we need to talk about how I can help you pay for your niece's surgery. The alarm on Rowan Reynolds' phone screamed at 4:31 in the morning. 4:31, not 4:30. Those extra 60 seconds mattered when you were trying to stretch a tank of gas across 3 jobs and a dying niece. She sat up in the dark studio apartment in Little Havana, her breath forming small clouds in the unheated air. The AC unit had stopped working in August. It was now November. The ceiling above her bed bore a water stain shaped like a continent, brown edges spreading like an infection. In the corner, roach traps lay in geometric patterns. She had placed them there herself, checking them every morning, disposing of the small bodies with rubber gloves and a prayer that never quite formed into words. The black maid uniform hung on a wire hanger behind the bathroom door. White collar, white apron, black shoes with holes in the soles she had glued together twice already. The third time would not hold. She had maybe 2 weeks before she needed another pair, and another pair meant $38 she did not have. $34 remained in her checking account. 34. She counted it the way other people counted blessings. $34 stood between her and total ruin for the next 4 days. Rent was paid. Utilities were paid. What remained was the gap between staying alive and something worse. The debt collector's letter sat on the small table next to her bed, the paper worn soft from being opened and reread 100 times. Final notice stamped in red across the top. 10 days. That was all. 10 days until St. Catherine's Children's Hospital cancelled Emma's surgery. 10 days until the surgical slot passed to another child, another family, another chance that would not come again. $200,000. The number had stopped feeling real months ago. It had transformed into something abstract, like the distance to the moon, like the number of stars in the sky. It existed only as proof of her failure. Rowan dressed in the darkness. The apartment was so small she could touch both walls if she stretched her arms. No light switch worked reliably, so she navigated by muscle memory, by the terrible familiarity of a space that had become her whole life. She brushed her teeth with water from the tap that ran cold for 30 seconds before warm water appeared. She combed her dark hair into a braid. She did not look in the mirror. She had stopped doing that sometime in September. At 5:15, she walked toward the Blackwell estate on the eastern edge of Miami Beach, cutting through neighborhoods that were still sleeping. The November air was cool on her skin, dry and clean in a way that made the coming rain feel like a threat. The sky above the ocean was darkening, clouds gathering in the distance like an army assembling. The Blackwell estate announced itself through wrought iron gates, white columns visible beyond the manicured hedges, a structure so large it seemed less like a home and more like a monument to something she could never understand. 14 bedrooms. 16 bathrooms. A kitchen with 6 burners that Evelyn Blackwell used to cook perhaps once a month. The rest of the time, meals came from restaurants whose names Rowan could not pronounce. She entered through the service entrance, past the kitchen where 2 chefs were already preparing breakfast, past the pantry lined with imported foods, and into the foyer where the marble floor caught and magnified every footstep into an echo that made the space feel even larger, even more impossible. Evelyn Blackwell was waiting. She stood at the top of the curved staircase in a Chanel suit that cost more than Rowan earned in 3 months. Platinum blonde hair cut with surgical precision. Diamond tennis bracelet catching the light from the crystal chandelier. At 52 years old, she looked like a woman who had never experienced hunger, or doubt, or the feeling of her own heartbeat becoming irregular from stress. "The banister," Evelyn said. Her voice was thin, sharp like a blade. "I found dust on the banister yesterday." Rowan moved toward the stairs without speaking. The dust had been invisible. She had run her hand across every inch of that wood twice, and still Evelyn had found something that did not meet the standard of acceptability that existed only in her own mind. "Yes," Rowan said. "You people are all the same," Evelyn continued, descending the stairs with her hand trailing along the rail that Rowan would now polish again. "Lazy. Incompetent. You are lucky I give you work at all. There are thousands of women who would do better. Thousands." The words hit exactly where they were meant to hit. Not on Rowan's skin, but deeper, in the place where her belief in her own worth had been slowly eroding for 2 years like a cliff face in endless rain. "I will polish it again," Rowan said. Evelyn did not respond. She was already moving toward the kitchen, already dismissing Rowan from her consciousness, already assuming the next servant would appear to fulfill the next demand. In the Blackwell household, Rowan was less than furniture. furniture at least served a function everyone acknowledged. She pulled the polishing cloth from her apron pocket and climbed the stairs, running her hands across every inch of wood, every curve and joint. The morning light through the high windows fell across her hands, showing her exactly how many lines were there now, how much the skin had changed, how her body was aging faster than her years should allow. By 10 a.m., she had moved through the mansion in an invisible choreography. Bathrooms cleaned, floors swept, linens changed, trash removed. She had seen no one except Evelyn, had been addressed by no one. The household staff, a rotating cast of 5, did not learn her name. They called her the cleaner if they addressed her at all. She walked to St. Catherine's Children's Shelter at 3 p.m. before her night shift at Marcello's restaurant. The shelter occupied a converted warehouse in Wynwood, painted with murals of brightly colored animals and smiling children. Inside, the reality was quieter. A long hallway with 7 rooms, each containing 6 to 8 children. Kids pulled from homes that had broken apart, waiting for social services to decide what came next, living in a state of temporary that sometimes lasted months or years. The volunteer coordinator did not look up from her desk when Rowan arrived. "Room 3, she said. "We have a new admission that nobody can get to talk. Maybe you can." Room 3 was painted yellow. Sunflowers on the walls, though the sunshine was filtered and artificial. Emma Ferraro sat on the edge of a small bed, her knees drawn up to her chest, her dark curls falling forward to hide her face. 6 years old. Dressed in donated clothes that did not fit quite right. Her eyes, when she finally lifted them to look at Rowan, were the color of cinnamon and held a knowledge that no 6-year-old should possess. "Hello," Rowan said, sitting on the floor so she was lower than the child, less threatening. "My name is Rowan." "What is your name?" "Emma," the girl whispered. The coincidence struck Rowan like a physical blow. Emma. The same name as her niece. The same name as the reason she woke up at 4:31 every morning and kept walking. "I like that name," Rowan said. "It is a strong name. Would you like me to braid your hair?" The girl did not respond. But she did not pull away when Rowan began to gently work through the tangles, her fingers moving slowly, carefully, the way her mother had braided her own hair in a kitchen in another life, before everything fell apart. For 40 minutes, there was only the sound of the shelter around them, muffled through the walls. Voices of other children. A television in the common room. Footsteps passing in the hallway. When Rowan finished, Emma looked at her for a long moment. Then she leaned against Rowan's shoulder, sudden and complete, the full weight of her small body resting there like a surrender. "Stay," Emma said. "I will come back tomorrow," Rowan said. "No," Emma said. "Stay. Everyone leaves. I do not want you to leave." Rowan felt something in her chest break and expand at the same time, becoming too large to fit inside her ribs. She held the girl against her side and did not speak, because speaking would require her to explain that she had to work, that she had to earn money for a daughter she did not have, that the love she was pouring into this moment was borrowed from a life that did not exist yet. At 6 p.m., she walked to Marcello's restaurant as the first drops of rain began to fall. Fat drops that splashed against the concrete, that darkened the pavement into new shades of gray. The sky above Miami was turning into something angry, clouds rolling in from the Atlantic like a threat, like a warning of something coming that no one could stop. The restaurant kitchen was all steam and heat, a blast of warmth against the November cold. Rowan tied on her apron and became invisible again, washing dishes, scrubbing pots, moving through the heat like she had learned to move through the world, quietly, efficiently, without drawing attention to her own existence. At 11:13 p.m., she was wiping down the back station when she heard the commotion at the front of the restaurant. Shouts. The crash of something breaking. The kitchen staff stilled, all of them listening to something happening in a world they did not have permission to enter. Then the back door burst open, and a man stumbled through, his hand pressed against his side, blood seeping between his fingers, his breathing ragged and wrong. The man who stumbled through the kitchen door was drowning in his own blood. His hand pressed against his side, fingers spread wide over a wound that refused to stop weeping red onto the white tile floor. His breathing came in fractured gasps, each one sharper than the last, like something inside his chest was breaking with every inhale. The expensive suit, charcoal grey, tailored to his broad shoulders, worth more than Rowan's annual salary, was ruined. Soaked through. The silk shirt beneath hung open, revealing a chest carved from years of controlled violence and careful living, now marred by 2 wounds that should not exist. His eyes found hers across the kitchen, and in that moment Rowan Reynolds understood something that would reshape the entire architecture of her life. This man was powerful enough to bleed on her floor and have no one stop him. This man was dangerous. "Help," he whispered, and his voice carried the weight of someone unaccustomed to asking for anything. "Please." Rowan moved without thinking. She grabbed kitchen towels from the counter, clean ones, thank God, still folded from the lunch service. She dropped to her knees beside him, her apron soaking through with his blood, and pressed the fabric against his abdominal wound. His eyes closed. A sound escaped his throat like a man drowning. "Stay with me," she said, and her voice was steady even though her hands trembled. "What is your name?" "Vincent," he breathed. "Vincent Ferraro." "My daughter." "Emma, find Emma, she is alone." Then his eyes rolled back, and the weight of him became too much to hold. The back door burst open 16 hours later. Not just opened. Burst. Like something explosive had been detonated against it from the outside. Rowan was standing at her kitchenette, wearing yesterday's clothes, watching Emma sleep on her mattress for the first time, when the sound of multiple car doors slamming echoed from the street below. Then footsteps on the stairs. Heavy. Coordinated. The footsteps of men trained to move together. She had exactly 3 seconds to think before the knock came, not a knock, a command delivered through knuckles against wood. When she opened the door, there were 50 men in black suits fanning out behind a single figure in the hallway. The figure was tall, 6'2" at minimum, salt and pepper hair swept back from a face carved from stone and circumstance. The scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone caught the hallway light like a blade. When he looked at her, his eyes held the weight of someone who had spent the night believing his daughter was gone forever, and then, in a single impossible moment, found her breathing. "Is she here?" Vincent Ferraro asked, and his voice trembled in a way that seemed to contradict everything about him. Behind him, Rocco's hand rested on his weapon. Enzo's jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might break. Both men were staring at Rowan like she was a ghost who had materialized in a maid's uniform to haunt them. "Yes," Rowan said. "She is sleeping. She has nightmares. She wakes at 3 a.m. most nights, Anne." Vincent moved past her into the apartment, and when Emma stirred on the mattress and opened her eyes, the child's face transformed into something incandescent with joy. "Papa," she cried, and her small body launched itself toward him. Vincent caught her, held her, buried his face in her hair, and for a moment he was not the man with the scar or the legend whispered in dark rooms. He was simply a father who had been handed back his most precious thing. When he finally looked at Rowan, his eyes were wet. "Thank you," he said, and the words seemed insufficient for what he was trying to convey. "Thank you. I have been searching for 6 months. I have burned this city looking for her, and you, where did you find her?" "St. Catherine's shelter," Rowan said quietly. "She was dropped off 3 weeks ago. No one claimed her. The director said if no one came forward in 2 weeks, she would be placed in the foster system. I was going to apply for guardianship." Vincent's entire body went still. "You were going to take her," he said, "not a question. A woman with nothing was going to take my daughter." Rocco and Enzo exchanged a look that suggested they were witnessing something impossible. In 15 years of working for Vincent Ferraro, they had never seen him look at another person this way, like she had resurrected something dead inside him. "She needed someone," Rowan said simply. "That is all." Emma was clinging to her now, arms wrapped around Rowan's neck, face buried in her shoulder. The child would not release her, even with her father standing there. Vincent watched his daughter's desperate grip on a stranger in a maid's uniform, and something shifted in his expression. "There was a man found bleeding in an alley last night," Vincent said. "Behind Marcello's restaurant. He was shot twice and should have died. Instead, he was found by someone who knew how to stop a bleed, someone who stayed with him in the rain until help arrived. Someone who never gave her name." He paused. "That man was me." Rowan's face went pale. "You saved my life, and you never asked for anything," Vincent continued, and his voice had taken on the quality of someone making a confession in a confessional booth. "And now I discover you were going to save my daughter too." "Why?" "Because it was right," Rowan said, and her voice held no calculation, no agenda, no hidden need. Just simple truth. "I do not need anything from you. I need to get ready for work." She moved toward the door, but Vincent's hand reached out, not touching her, but blocking her path with his presence alone. "I know about the surgery," he said quietly. $200,000. Your niece, Emma's valve replacement. You have 10 days. He paused. "The surgery is paid for. The hospital will call you within the hour." Rowan stopped moving entirely. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "No," she whispered. "No. Why would you do that? Why would you?" She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I am nobody. I do not want." "You are the woman my daughter calls Mama," Vincent said, and there was a finality in his voice that suggested this was no longer a matter for discussion. "You are not nobody anymore." That evening, Rowan stood in front of her bathroom mirror wearing a dress she had not put on in 3 years, faded blue cotton, fraying at the hem, but clean. She had washed her hair. She had even found an old lipstick at the bottom of a drawer. She looked like a woman trying to climb out of an ocean while still half submerged. Vincent had sent a car. A black SUV with tinted windows and Rocco driving, his hand steady on the wheel, his eyes occasionally glancing at her in the mirror like he was checking to make sure she was real. Marcello's restaurant glowed from the street like a jeweled box. The maître d' appeared the moment she approached, mouth opening to turn her away, but Vincent was already there, his hand on her back, guiding her past the candlelit tables where couples ate pasta and whispered intimacies into the flickering light. The private booth in the back was separated from the rest of the restaurant by carved wooden panels. Rocco and Enzo stood 10 feet away, their bodies angled in that particular way bodyguards stand when they are part of the furniture, present but deliberately invisible. "My father was murdered when I was 17, Vincent said, and the wine in his glass caught the candlelight and held it. In a restaurant very much like this one. I was in the storeroom. I heard him die and did nothing because I was a coward." He looked at her across the table. "I spent 30 years becoming powerful enough that no one could touch what belonged to me. And then they took Emma anyway. Took her because I had made enemies, because power attracts enemies like light attracts insects." Rowan listened. She understood that he was not telling her a story meant to impress her. He was showing her the wound. "I have 50 men who would die without hesitation," Vincent continued. "I have money that I cannot spend in a lifetime. I have power that has shaped this city in ways people do not even realize. And I could not save my daughter. You did it with nothing but kindness and a willingness to stay when you could have walked away." "I stayed because she needed me," Rowan said softly. "That is all." "I know," Vincent replied. "That is exactly why it matters." At 9:33 p.m., a man entered the restaurant through the front entrance. He moved with the careless confidence of someone who believed the world would rearrange itself to accommodate his passage. Slick-back black hair. Gold rings on nearly every finger. A designer suit in charcoal that probably cost what Rowan made in 3 months. Anthony Marchetti, Vincent's nephew, walked directly to their table and stopped. "Uncle," he said, and his smile was the kind that looked like a knife wrapped in silk. "Is this the maid? The one everyone is talking about? The one who thinks she can play Mama to Emma?" His eyes moved over Rowan like something oily, something that left a mark just by looking. "You clean toilets. You are nobody. But you are pretty enough. Maybe I should show you what happens to women who get ideas above their station. His hand reached toward her shoulder. Vincent's hand slammed the table so hard the wine glasses jumped. "Walk away, Anthony," he said, and his voice had become something sharp and final. "Now." Anthony laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and trailed his fingers across Rowan's shoulder anyway before walking away into the restaurant. She felt his touch like a contamination, like something had marked her for later collection. When she looked at Vincent, she saw something dangerous moving behind his eyes. "He will not touch you again," Vincent said. "I will make certain of it." But what Rowan did not know was that Anthony had already made 3 phone calls from the restaurant bathroom. The first was to a man named Castellano who ran a trafficking operation out of a warehouse in Dade County. The second was to Evelyn Blackwell, who lived in the palatial estate where Rowan scrubbed floors every morning. The third was a simple message: the maid had become a liability, and liabilities needed to be eliminated. 3 miles away, in a marble foyer that cost more than some houses, Evelyn Blackwell smiled when she saw Rowan arrive for her morning shift. The words came before the maid could even set down her cleaning supplies. "I heard the most interesting rumor," Evelyn said, her voice like frost forming on a window. "My invisible, pathetic maid was seen at Marcello's restaurant. Wearing a dress. Sitting at a table with Vincent Ferraro like she was something more than the help." Rowan's hand stilled on her mop handle. "I was thanking him," she said quietly. "He helped my niece." Evelyn stepped closer, her perfume suffocating the air between them. She pulled out her phone and showed Rowan a photograph, little Emma in a hospital bed, a line taped to her arm, her small face uncertain and afraid. "I know people at that hospital," Evelyn whispered. "One word from me and complications happen. Children die, Rowan. Surgery dates get delayed. Infection spread. Do you understand what I am saying?" Rowan's breath caught in her throat. "Why?" she asked. "What did I do to you?" "You existed," Evelyn said simply. "Where you should not exist. Now get on your knees and scrub that foyer. On your knees." The marble was cold against Rowan's skin as she dropped and began to scrub, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the brush. Evelyn stood over her, phone in hand, the photograph of Emma still visible on the screen, a reminder that power could reach into hospitals and hospitals could reach into veins and veins could carry poison dressed up as medicine. That afternoon, Vincent brought Emma to the apartment himself. The child ran to Rowan with such force that Rowan staggered backward, catching herself on the kitchenette counter. Emma's arms wrapped around her waist, squeezing with the force of complete, uncomplicated devotion. "Mama," Emma said, her face buried in Rowan's stomach. "Can I stay with you? I do not want to go back to Papa's big house. I want to stay with you. Can you be my mama?" The word hung in the air like something sacred. Vincent stood frozen in the doorway. His expression went through 1,000 shifts in the space of 5 seconds: shock, recognition, desperation, and finally something that looked like surrender. "She has not called anyone mama since she was 3 years old," Vincent said, and his voice sounded like it was traveling up from underwater. "Not her birth mother. Not her grandmother. Not anyone." He watched his daughter cling to Rowan like she was the only solid thing in a world made of water. "She is already more bonded to you than she has ever been to anyone." Rowan looked at him over Emma's head. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them, not quite love, but the recognition that love might be possible, might be waiting just beyond the next threshold. Vincent's phone buzzed in his pocket. Then again. Then a third time. When he pulled it out, his face hardened into something carved from ice. Rocco had sent 3 photographs and a message: "Anthony met with Castellano tonight. The maid is the target. They are moving fast." Vincent looked at Rowan, and she saw the moment he understood that protecting her would require becoming the violent man he had been trying not to be anymore. The rain hammered against the window like 1,000 fists demanding entry. Rowan sat on the bathroom floor of her apartment, her maid uniform still clinging to her body, the wine stain from Evelyn's deliberate cruelty visible across the white fabric like a mark of shame. Her hands trembled as she held the medicine bottle, 10 sleeping pills dissolving slowly in her palm. The thunder outside sounded like the world breaking apart. She had counted her money that morning, $34 in her wallet, and rent due in 4 days. Emma's surgery was in 6 days. Anthony's threat was 10 days old and still burning fresh in her chest. Accidents happen in hospitals. She brought her shaking hand toward her mouth. Then her phone buzzed. A photograph appeared on the screen. Emma asleep in her bed at Vincent's mansion, her small hand clutching the stuffed unicorn Rowan had given her at the shelter 3 weeks ago. Beneath the photo, written in Vincent's careful handwriting, "She asked me to tell you good night, Mama." The pills slipped from Rowan's fingers. They scattered across the bathroom tile like tiny stones, and she reached for the sink with a sob caught in her throat. Water ran over her hands as she swept the pills away, watching them dissolve into nothing. She slid down the wall, her back against the cool tiles, and cried in a way she had not allowed herself to cry since her mother died. One tiny thing stopped her. One moment of being needed. One word, Mama, that made her matter. She did not know that Vincent was already awake at that same hour, standing in his study with Rocco, reading a text message that would change everything. At 5:48 in the morning, Rocco delivered the news that he had been holding since the previous afternoon. The words came out like weapons. Anthony threatened her life. He was at her car, at the parking lot where she works. He grabbed her wrist. He threatened Emma's surgery, said accidents happen in hospitals. Rocco watched Vincent's face transform from tired to something carved from stone. And Evelyn humiliated her in front of 50 women. Made her clean wine from her own dress on her knees. Recorded it. The whole thing. Vincent did not speak. He walked to the window and looked out at Miami's sleeping streets, the city dark and quiet before dawn. His jaw clenched so tight that Rocco could see the muscle working beneath his skin. When he finally turned back, his eyes held something that Rocco had only seen twice in 20 years of loyalty, a kind of controlled fury that made violence seem like mercy. "Get 12 men," Vincent said, his voice low and solid like an oath carved into granite. "Armed. Black suits. We move at 6:30. He paused. "And call the FBI. Give them everything we have on Anthony's trafficking network. Every name, every transaction, every girl he has hidden. Federal warrants, Rocco. I want this done with law, not just with bullets." He threatened my daughter's mother. He threatened Emma. That means he dies 1,000 times over, in prison, in court, in the eyes of the world. Rocco nodded and left to make the calls. Vincent sat at his desk and pulled up the photographs that Rocco had taken, Anthony with the traffic girls, the cocaine on the nightstand, the ledgers spread across the floor like confessions written in blood. He sent them all to a contact at the FBI field office, a man who owed him a favor from a decade ago. Then he waited, watching the clock on the wall tick toward 6:24 a.m. At 6:15, he sent a photograph of his own to Rowan. "Emma asleep." A note. 3 words that meant everything. The apartment building where Rowan lived was dark and silent when the black SUVs pulled up to the curb at 6:27 in the morning. She was still on the bathroom floor, her breathing slowly steadying, her hands beginning to stop their shaking. She did not hear the vehicles arrive. She did not know that in the next 72 hours, her entire life would transform. Anthony Mucchetti woke to the sound of his bedroom door being kicked open at 6:33 a.m. He was in bed with 2 women, girls, really, their eyes empty like broken dolls. Cocaine dust still hung in the air like a curse that had settled into the room itself. His penthouse apartment on the 32nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Biscayne Bay held evidence of his empire, the kind of criminal carelessness that comes from believing you are untouchable because your blood carries the weight of a legendary name. Rocco came through the door first, 12 men moving behind him like a coordinated strike. No guns drawn yet, but the promise of violence hung in the air between them like a blade wrapped in ice. Anthony's eyes went wide with the shock of a man who has never considered the possibility of consequences. "Get up," Rocco said, his voice quiet and measured. Anthony tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Rocco caught him by the hair and threw him backward onto the bed. Anthony's body hit the mattress with a sound like something breaking inside him. He screamed, a high, desperate sound, and tried to scramble away. "I am family!" Anthony shrieked, his voice cracking. "I am Vincent's blood! You cannot do this!" Rocco stood over him, completely still. "Vincent's blood does not traffic children," he said. "Vincent's blood does not threaten mothers and daughters. You are nothing." The 2 girls were already being ushered out by 2 of the men, given robes, told they were safe now, that help was coming. Their names were being recorded. Their cases were being filed. Their lives, still salvageable at the edges, were being pulled back from the darkness that Anthony Marchetti had thrown them into. Outside the penthouse, the Miami skyline glowed with the first light of dawn. The city was waking up to a day that would change its criminal architecture forever. At 7:01 a.m., federal agents entered the building. The FBI had been waiting for this moment. Vincent's evidence had been bulletproof, 2 years of meticulous documentation of Anthony's sex trafficking network, his offshore accounts, his money laundering. Federal warrants were signed and executed with the precision of a military operation. 12 agents in dark windbreakers moved through the penthouse with practiced efficiency. They did not need to fight. Anthony was already broken, already sobbing, already trying to make calls that would not save him. "Anthony Marchetti, you are under arrest," an agent read, cuffing him with deliberate slowness. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Anthony's screams echoed down the hallway as they led him out. By 7:15 a.m., his face was on 3 news channels. By 7:45 a.m., his mugshot was trending online. By 8:44 a.m., his name was synonymous with predatory cruelty, the nephew of a legendary crime boss who had committed crimes so severe that they demanded federal prosecution. 40 years. A prison sentence that meant he would leave prison as an old man, if he left at all. But Vincent was not finished. At the exact same moment that Anthony was being led away in handcuffs, the FBI was arriving at the Blackwell estate. Evelyn Blackwell was on her terrace in a Chanel robe, drinking her 3rd espresso of the morning, reviewing the guest list for a charity gala that would never happen. The summer sun was just breaking above the horizon, casting golden light across the manicured gardens where, the previous afternoon, she had made Rowan kneel in front of 50 of Miami's wealthiest women. The sound of car doors slamming below made her pause. Footsteps on the marble staircase. Then federal agents coming through the glass doors onto her terrace. Evelyn's cup fell from her hand. It shattered on the marble floor like her entire world shattering at once. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice still carrying the brittle authority of old money. "Do you know who I am?" Evelyn Blackwell, an agent said, reading from a warrant. "You are under arrest for money laundering through shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. Tax evasion spanning 12 years. Fraud totaling approximately $3.2 million. The words fell like stones. Evelyn tried to run toward her phone, but an agent blocked her path. She tried to call her lawyer. No one answered. Her accounts had already been frozen. Federal seizure warrants had been filed against every property she owned. The Blackwell estate, worth $14 million, was no longer hers. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. She was still screaming when they led her down the staircase, past the household staff who had served her for decades, past the maids whose dignity she had spent years destroying. One maid watched from the foyer, a woman Evelyn had made clean up her spilled drinks, had mocked for her accent, had referred to as the help in conversations with her friends. "She always said we were beneath her," the maid whispered to the woman beside her. "Look at her now." The front doors opened. News cameras were waiting. 3 news vans had somehow already arrived, which meant Vincent had called the local stations, which meant this arrest was going to be broadcast to every corner of Miami. Evelyn Blackwell, in a Chanel robe with no makeup, in federal handcuffs, screaming about her lawyers and her standing and her name as though any of it still mattered. A federal agent placed his hand on her head and guided her into the back of a black sedan. Her voice continued to echo across the lawn. "Do you know who I am? Do you understand what you are doing?" The agent's response came through the open car door, flat and without emotion. "A criminal. 40 years if convicted. And you will be convicted." By 9 a.m., both arrests had been announced on every local news station. By noon, they were national news. By 4 p.m., the story had spread to international outlets. The nephew of legendary Mafia boss Vincent Ferraro arrested for sex trafficking. The wife of a prominent businessman arrested for money laundering. Two people from different worlds, connected by their cruelty to a woman named Rowan Reynolds. The woman they had threatened. The woman they had humiliated. The woman they had tried to destroy. Rowan learned about the arrests when Vincent came to her apartment door at 10 a.m. that morning. He stood in her doorway dressed in an expensive black suit, his face showing no emotion, but his eyes told her everything. Behind him, Rocco waited by the hallway. "They are gone," Vincent said simply. "Both of them. Anthony is in federal custody. 40 years. Evelyn is in federal custody. 40 years. Your niece's surgery will proceed without any threats, any complications, any accidents. It will proceed because you are not nobody, Rowan. You never were." Rowan stood frozen in her doorway, still wearing the Maid uniform, the wine stain still visible. The news was too large to fit inside her mind all at once. She had been terrified for so long that the absence of terror felt like a vacuum. Vincent stepped inside the apartment and closed the door behind him. He took her face in his hands with a gentleness that contradicted everything about him, and he looked directly into her eyes. "Emma is waiting at the mansion," he said. "She has been asking for you since dawn. She does not want to go to school. She wants you. She wants Mama." The word hung between them like something sacred, like something that could remake the entire world. The hospital waiting room at 4:24 in the morning was a fluorescent tomb. Rowan sat in a plastic chair that had been sat in by 10,000 terrified people before her, her hands twisted together so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The clock on the wall ticked. 73 minutes until Emma's surgery. 73 minutes until the surgeon would open her niece's small chest and replace the valve that had been slowly failing since birth. $200,000 worth of minutes. $200,000 that Vincent had transferred without hesitation, without negotiation, the money appearing in the hospital account like a miracle that smelled distinctly of blood money and redemption. Vincent sat beside her in the same plastic chair. He was still dressed in his black suit from the arrests, the fabric slightly wrinkled now, and there was a smudge of something on his white shirt cuff that Rowan did not want to examine too closely. She had told him he did not need to come. She had told him this was her family, her burden, her terror to carry alone. He had looked at her with those storm-grey eyes and said, "You are my family now, Rowan. Where you are, I am." The words had unmade her completely. Rocco appeared in the waiting room doorway at 5:12 a.m. carrying coffee in a cardboard tray. The cups were from a 24-hour cafe 2 blocks away, the expensive kind that cost more than Rowan used to spend on food in a week. He set them down silently, a man who understood that words had no power in this moment, only presence had power. Enzo followed behind with a bag of pastries wrapped in white paper. Neither man sat down. They took positions by the hallway like guards, which is exactly what they were. Guards for a woman who had once had nothing and now, somehow, had two men who would stand in hospital corridors at dawn without question. Rowan reached for the coffee but her hands were shaking too badly. Vincent took the cup and held it to her lips like she was a child who needed feeding. She drank, tasted burnt sugar and cream, tasted his hands trembling as he held the cup steady. In 15 years of knowing him, she had never seen Vincent Ferraro's hands shake. "She will be fine," he said. His voice was not the voice of a mafia boss. It was the voice of a man who understood loss so deeply that he would move heaven to prevent it from happening to anyone he loved. The surgeon said the valve replacement is routine. Children recover in days. What if something goes wrong? Rowan's voice came out like broken glass. What if her heart stops? What if they cannot restart it? What if? Rowan. Vincent set the coffee down. He took her face in his hands, the same way he had done in her apartment when he told her that both Anthony and Evelyn had been arrested. His palms were warm. His thumbs traced her cheekbones with unbearable gentleness. Look at me. I need you to look at me. She looked. She saw a man with a scar running from his left eye to his jawline, a man who had lived 1,000 dangerous moments and survived them all. But she also saw the father of a 7-year-old girl named Emma who colored on tablecloths and called her Mama. She saw the man who had learned that protecting people meant something different than he had always believed. The surgeon has done this surgery 473 times, Vincent said, and the specificity was meant to anchor her, to give her numbers to hold onto instead of fear. 473 children. 472 successful outcomes. The odds are not in tragedy's favor, Rowan. The odds are in Emma's favor. At 5:03 a.m., a nurse came through the doors pushing a small bed. Emma was already sedated, her small body wrapped in a hospital gown that swallowed her, her dark hair tied back from her face. Her hand stuck out from under the blanket, and Rowan reached for it without thinking, held those small fingers, and felt her entire life compress into a single point of unbearable love. This child who had been born with a broken heart, who had survived for years of living with that broken heart, who would now have it fixed because a man Rowan had found bleeding in an alley had the kind of power that moved mountains. Mama, Emma whispered through the sedative, her voice slurred and small. Mama, will you be here when I wake up? I will be right here, Rowan said. Her voice fractured on every word. I will be right here the entire time, sweetheart. I promise. The nurse nodded and began rolling the bed toward the surgical wing. Vincent pulled Rowan up from her chair and held her against his chest as their daughter disappeared through the double doors. She could hear the mechanical hiss of the doors closing. She could hear Rocco's breathing in the hallway. She could hear the clock on the wall, relentless and indifferent, counting the minutes of surgery like a heartbeat. For hours and 7 minutes. That is how long they waited. Rowan sat in the same plastic chair, and Vincent sat beside her, and neither of them moved except when Enzo brought fresh coffee or when Rocco brought untouched sandwiches. At hour 2, Rowan put her head on Vincent's shoulder. At hour 3, she was crying silently, tears running down her face without sound. Vincent held her hand and did not let go. At 9:20 a.m., the surgeon came through the doors. He was still in his surgical scrubs, his mask hanging around his neck, and there was that particular exhaustion on his face that Rowan had learned meant 8 hours of absolute concentration. He looked at them and he smiled. He smiled. The valve replacement went perfectly, he said. His voice was steady and clear, and it was the most beautiful sound Rowan had ever heard. No complications. No surprises. Her heart is strong. She is going to be absolutely fine. She is going to live a long, healthy life. Rowan's knees gave way. Vincent caught her before she fell and pulled her against him, and she collapsed into his chest with a sound that was part sob, part prayer, part the breaking open of 4 years of terror that had been compressed into a small tight ball in the center of her chest. For years of knowing her niece had a broken heart. For years of watching her breathe with difficulty. For years of terror. Vincent buried his face in her hair and held her, his own shoulders moving in ways that told Rowan he was crying too. She could feel it, the shake of his body, the dampness against her skin, the sound of a man who had learned that love was not weakness but the deepest kind of power. In the hallway, Rocco was staring at them with an expression Rowan had never seen on his weathered face. Enzo stood beside him, and they were both utterly still. In 15 years I have never seen him cry, Rocco whispered. What the hell is this woman? Enzo was quiet for a long moment. Then, family, I think. That is what this is. She is family now. The recovery room was small and white and filled with machines that beeped with steady reassurance. Emma lay in the hospital bed, tubes running from her arms, her small chest rising and falling with the even breathing of deep sleep. Her sister Emma, little Emma Ferraro, Vincent's daughter, sat in a chair beside the bed, her 7-year-old face solemn and watchful. When she saw Rowan and Vincent come through the door, she climbed carefully out of the chair and into the hospital bed, moving with the precision of a child who understood that gentle movements were required. She took her sister's hand, and she said in a voice that was clear and certain, "Mama, Rowan saved you too. She saves everyone." Vincent stood in the doorway. He watched Rowan move to the bed and brush the hair back from Emma's unconscious face. He watched her take his daughter's hand. He watched her exist in a moment that was impossible and real, a woman with nothing who had somehow become everything, a maid with $34 in her pocket who had rebuilt the entire architecture of his heart and his daughter's world. That evening, on the hospital roof as the sun descended toward the horizon and Miami glittered below them like a promise, Vincent asked her, "What do you want, Rowan? Not what you think you deserve. What do you want?" Rowan stood at the edge of the roof, the wind catching her hair, the city spreading out beneath them like a map of all the places she had been invisible. She was quiet for so long that Vincent thought she might not answer. "Then, I want to stop being invisible. I want to matter to someone." Vincent crossed the space between them in 2 steps. He cupped her face with hands that had done terrible things but were gentle with her, always gentle. He looked directly into her eyes and he said, "You matter to Emma. You matter to me. You have mattered since the alley, since the moment you chose kindness instead of looking away." He kissed her as the sun touched the horizon and the world shifted on its axis. Below them, Miami sparkled in the dusk. Behind them, in a hospital room, 2 little girls who both called her Mama were safe. For the first time in her life, Rowan Reynolds was not invisible. The newscast played on the television in the restaurant bar as Vincent and Rowan sat at their tables 6 months later. Anthony Marchetti was being led into a courtroom, his face gaunt with the realization of consequences. 40 years. Federal prison. Evelyn Blackwell's mugshot appeared on screen, her carefully constructed social standing demolished, her name becoming synonymous with money laundering and cruelty. Her assets had been liquidated. Her estate sold. Her name erased from the guest lists of every country club in Miami. Justice, Vincent had explained once, was not always loud. Sometimes it was the long slow fall of people who believed themselves untouchable. Sometimes it was federal warrants and systematic destruction. The engagement ring on Rowan's finger caught the candlelight. Simple gold band with a single diamond. Nothing ostentatious. Everything meaningful. Little Emma Ferraro was coloring on the white tablecloth with crayons the staff had brought her. She looked up at Rowan with absolute certainty. "Mama, when is the wedding?" Rowan's niece Emma, healthier now, her small heart strong and steady, added, "Can I be a flower girl?" Rowan laughed. She looked at Vincent across the table, saw the man who had been bleeding in the alley, saw the man who had learned that power was not control but protection, saw the father who had learned to be gentle. He was smiling at her with unguarded softness that his men still whispered about, shaking their heads in wonder. At the bar, Rocco and Enzo watched. "A maid," Rocco said quietly. A woman with $34 in her pocket changed everything. Enzo nodded slowly. "Not a maid anymore. She is the boss's wife. She is the girl's mother. She is family." The waiter brought tiramisu. The girl squealed. Rowan wiped cream from little Emma's nose, kissed her niece's forehead, felt Vincent's hand on her shoulder, warm and present and real. When they walked out of the restaurant into the Miami night, the same alley was visible where Vincent had been bleeding in the rain 6 months ago. Rowan paused at the edge of the pavement, staring at the dumpster, the concrete, the rain-washed space where everything had changed. Vincent stopped beside her. "What are you thinking?" Rowan met his eyes. "That 6 months ago I was invisible. I thought nobody saw me. I thought I did not matter. And now? Now I know that the people who seem invisible are sometimes the ones who carry the greatest light. We just need someone to see it." Vincent pulled her close, kissed her temple, held her against him as they walked to the waiting car where Rocco was holding the door open. Two little girls, already buckled in, giggled about flower girl dresses and cake flavors and the future that belonged to them now. Rowan slid into the passenger seat of a life she had never imagined. A life she had earned not with power or money, but with invisible kindness in a rain-soaked alley. Sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light. Sometimes saving a stranger in the rain saves yourself. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show up with nothing but kindness and refuse to look away. Rowan Reynolds was a maid with $34 in her pocket who became the heart of a family. She was never invisible. We just were not looking close enough. If this story touched you, share it with someone who feels invisible today. Drop a like if you believe kindness is the most powerful weapon we have. Subscribe for more stories about people who change the world one quiet moment at a time. Tomorrow, we bring you another story that will make you believe in second chances. See you then.